Hi everyone, thank you for coming out again to the 2021 series of How Do We Go Forward, How Do We Go Back? My name is Dr. Fen Kennedy, I take they, them pronouns, and I am speaking to you from the stolen land of the Creek Nation, now known as Tuscaloosa, Alabama. How Do We Go Forward, How Do We Go Back began as a way for us to think about returning to dance in the fall of 2020. This summer offers us a chance not only to reflect on where we've come from, but to think about how we can change our communities as we move into another academic year. Every week, I invite two guests to have a conversation with each other about one element of this broader topic. After 30 minutes, I am going to invite everyone to turn on their cameras and open the floor up for questions. Everything is going to be recorded. I've written in my notes this semester the topic, which shows how much I desire to speak on this. This week, the topic is racism in dance communities. It has been my experience to date that talks like this tend to attract harassment. If that happens in this talk, I am going to err on the side of removing people first and talking about it later. I am so excited to have here as my guest this week, Ivy Gray and Gray Armstrong. Ivy is the founder of the Fusion Exchange, which ran from 2007 to 2014, and was a weekly contributor as a DJ, organizer, and volunteer for several local dance organizations for over 20 years. Most recently, Ivy has been deeply involved in West Coast Swing as a social dancer and successful competitor. Outside of dance, Ivy currently manages technology change initiatives and law based on ethics and behavioral economics, and is a former practicing lawyer. Gray Armstrong is a writer and instructor of Black culture, history, and dance. His work focuses on unpacking unconscious bias, cross-cultural communication, in addition to culture formation. He also travels the world teaching African American vernacular dances and giving lectures on Black history and culture. The founder of the popular blog and website Obsidian Tea, Gray explores themes of the Black experience and culture, anti-racism practice, developing cultural competency, and the evolving relationship between Black and white Americans in the United States from the transatlantic slave trade onwards. Where do you both want to get started?
All right. Well, Gray and I actually did some planning, and Gray's badass, so yay. We wanted to start with establishing some baseline facts so that we don't have to relitigate the history and where we are and set some ground rules so we can actually go forward. So I'm just going to jam through those things, and you should get on board. So we want to move forward, and none of these things should really be controversial. So yes, racism still exists. Yes, there's racism in dance. Yes, there's even racism on the West Coast. People who were alive during Jim Crow are still alive now and still applying Jim Crow etiquette. Racism has not ended, it's only morphed. Next, yes, people touch our hair. It's rude and it's racist. Don't do it. Even if you wouldn't mind somebody touching your hair, don't touch our hair. No objectifying or exoticizing someone because of their race is not a compliment. If you feel compelled to talk about our skin color, or your interest, intrigue, or attraction is based on presumptions about our background or a sexual performance, then you're objectifying and exoticizing, and that's dehumanizing. Don't do that to us. So finally, don't thrust your random anger about racist things on us. We are not here to be your punching bag while you work out the things that make you upset. So there you go. Those should be really clear things that you should accept, and I am tired of fighting about them on Facebook. So.
And if you don't understand, I think all of those topics, any of them can be found on my blog, obsidiant.com. That was literally created so I could say, here's a link.
Yes. Okay, so then the next thing that we wanted to really get a baseline on is establishing why we care about racism in dance. And Gray and I agreed to sort of split it. Well, I'll take the lead. Gray will add. Accurate? Okay, cool. So why do we care? Dance is this thing that we share. We participate in it. We love it. It's the thing that crosses boundaries. Art is not supposed to know any limits, and it should be a foundation for community, yet it's not. And there's a real constant outflow of people of color from the dance. So while our white friends may bring us in, it's the indifference and the lack of care that drives us out. And sometimes when we stay, despite all of our experiences, it's because of the networks and the relationships we've built with other dancers of color, specifically Black dancers, that allow us to stay. So that's the big community reason for why we should care. We also should care because in this thing that we share, as community members, we should be able to influence you. And you should be able to see us as human. We can't do anything about your racist uncle, but if we can influence you, then maybe you'll do something about your racist uncle. So yeah, it should be a place where we can break down those barriers and see people as human that maybe we wouldn't have interacted with before, people that may have always been other to us simply because we had no reason to cross paths. This should be an opportunity. But over the course of the pandemic, we've forgotten that, or other people seem to have forgotten, that we are humans sharing this same space. We are humans who used to have a lot in common and we used to care about each other. But in the isolation of this pandemic, we've gone to our polarized points, and we've stopped thinking about the things that we had in common, and we've only started thinking about the things that separate us. And that's a really unfortunate thing to happen to the dance community. And I'd like to see that change. So to me, that's why it matters. And then, the obvious thing, these are all Black dances. You should care about our history because this is our dance. So yeah. Anyhow, Gray, what do you have to add? I know you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think like another factor in this is people still want to believe that racism doesn't exist. And we mentioned that in the beginning, which I appreciate and loved your jam through it. But even still, people even give me often the feeling that they think that racism doesn't exist here. That's another thing that I've heard really regularly is people acknowledge that racism exists in the greater scheme of America, but they don't often acknowledge that it exists here in the dance space, which is different from society. It's not different. And also in their interpersonal interactions, there's this idea that it exists elsewhere, but not here. That has nothing to do with any of the things that we do here. And so the cultures that we set up in these spaces, as we said earlier, most of us exist and stay despite the feelings of alienation and dehumanization that exists in these communities, because one, they exist everywhere else too. And usually you either create enough of a network or enough of a love of that dance that you want to stay despite those things. And I think we don't often talk enough about how that impacts things, but then also that it's in our structures, it's in our competition values, it's in our who we hire for instructions, what we expect of instructors, what we expect of our venues, what they look like, how accessible they are, how costly they are is even a thing that I've noted is can be very different depending on what values you're starting with. And I will definitely want people to care about this because I want them to get to know me the way I've had to get to know them. And you had a thing. I'm curious.
Yes, I just wanted to, when you were talking about the values of our dance spaces, one of those things is about who is inherently valuable and who must prove that they're valuable. And there's a stark line between who is presumed to have value and those who must earn it or prove it. And the people who must earn it and prove it look like us.
I'm just like sitting with that as a thing for other people to hear, because I don't think that's something that people say often. Uh, but also in my mind, that brings up the fact of, these are Black dances, and so the question is that the way it should be? That's the way it is, but uh, is that something we want to accept in our communities and choose not to see, uh, if you have the privilege not to do so?
So when you say, is that the way it should be?
Mhm.
I hear you as saying, is our current culture set up the way that it should be? Not, is a Black dance supposed to continue being a Black dance? And I don't want somebody to walk away with the misunderstanding that we've somehow said, no, we don't want this to be a Black dance.
Like, we have the ability to say it's no longer Black. Yeah, you can have it. Like, we are the representatives of the whole culture, just us. You don't need to talk.
Well, don't you know, your one Black friend speaks for every Black person ever in the world. And if they say something is not racist, then it must not be racist. So
On the list of don't do that. Don't do that. Also, this is a side note. I don't even think it's in our list of things that we were like, let's talk about this. Um, because none of us represents the whole culture. If you or your family member happens to find a singular Black person who agrees with their viewpoint, we are not a monolith, and none of us speak for everyone. So keep these things in mind.
I think that's part of the thing about it being seen as an individual versus being seen as a fungible representative object.
Mm.
If we are individuals, of course, we speak only for ourselves. If we are not individuals and we're only tokens or representatives, then anything we say must, by its very nature, apply to everybody else. And how can you be a worthy individual in that context?
I feel like that's a big part of the Black existence. Like, how do you, the Black existence in white spaces, I should particularly say.
Yes.
And I know we haven't said this, and I think it's going to come up later, but we are talking specifically about Black issues. And I know that often in these types of discussions, there becomes a point where people want to talk about additional issues, or it becomes like we're talking about Black issues, so now we're talking about all of diversity. And we are being really intentional about talking about the Black experience, because that often happens, which is a thing to think about of why that often happens when it doesn't happen everywhere else.
Perhaps people are afraid to say the word Black.
Oh, which
Yeah.
there is a whole history about that, and it's just fascinating. But to stay somewhat on track in our time, so we're talking all about.
Just check. That's 15 minutes.
Great. We're talking all about that we want people to acknowledge that this racism is here, but the next thing that often happens is shame. And I'm using the idea of shame and not guilt, which guilt people have heard about, white guilt, white fragility. And I find that these terms are useful for an emotional release of minorities, but it's not particularly useful in the conversation, because it brings on white shame. It's this idea that guilt is I did a bad thing, and shame is I am a bad person. And so by acknowledging that you may have more shame than you have guilt can open up some abilities to start working on that, and realizing that, just because you feel bad doesn't mean you can quit. That you can do bad things that the system's like makes a really easy choice for you to do, and it might not mean that you are a bad person. Like, it might mean you're a bad person. Some people will see you as a bad person, but like, it doesn't mean you are intrinsically and forever unable to be good, which I feel like shame feeds into that concept. Um, Another thing is, like, don't ask us to comfort you when you know you've had a moment of racism or hurt somebody, because we literally get so many of those messages. For us, for you, we are the Black person in your life. For us, you are one of many white people in our lives who all do not know this lesson. Um, and so what I ask for people to do is to push that hurt outwards, away from the hurt party. Um, so, for instance, talking to another white friend of, I did this racist thing and I'm very guilty about it and I feel really bad about it. And I can be like, yeah, I get that. I've also done X racist thing because I didn't know better. And I'm like, yeah, this work is really hard. Yeah, this work is really hard. And then you move on. So getting your feelings validated is important, but also understanding that I don't want to have to be the one to do it would be great. You know, being willing to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to ask questions. And it's okay if you are wrong to get a critique and then try not to be defensive about it, about how you're not racist. Because the thing is like, whether you're racist or not isn't really the issue. The issue is you did a racist thing. And if you look at it through that lens, like, yes, it's the issue, but, staying somewhat functionally present, like, you did a racist thing, and that is a thing that you can fix. You can do something else. You can do something about it. You know, you can choose to not touch my hair. Your desire to touching my hair is a whole set of things we should talk about and should be worked on and we should look at. But in the meantime, you could just not. And that would be a bigger impact on my life personally than you possibly could realize. Because the times that people have just touched my hair, like a lady touched my hair right before surgery. I was like waiting for surgery to happen, and she walks down the hall. I haven't met her yet. It's just, your hair's so pretty. I love the color. And I'm like, lady.
They touch your hair and then they complain about what they get in return. Like, oh, it's greasy. Well, you shouldn't have touched my hair.
That, luckily, I have not received that particular critique, but I have felt like, oh, it's so different from what I'm used to. And I'm like, yes, I am a different ethnicity. Surprise. We have differences. We're all humans. Not all of it's the same.
Yeah. So back to the shame thing. If we tell you, don't do that thing, it's hurtful, it's dehumanizing, it's objectifying, and you start to get into this defensive spiral, and you recognize that you're getting into this defensive spiral, ending with some sort of dumb platitude like, oh, well, children are the future. With some education, everything will change, doesn't help. Like, we know that was your exit, get out of jail free card. I don't want to have this discussion anymore, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. So instead, apologize, vow to do better, and then go do better. I know you had a couple of other things on your set aside shame list, but we are now 20 minutes in. So, okay.
Yeah, I am watching that clock tick by and I'm like, oh, the things. So the last kind of major point for the shame bit, I guess last 2 points, is a lot of us feel different levels and different versions of injustice of different types. And those things are all valid. And there is a very particular And there is a particular feeling around and experience around specifically racial injustices and racial oppression. And I think it is important to acknowledge that um, in a lot of ways, being a singular minority, say a white person who is LGBT versus myself who is LGBT and Black, is going to have a very different uh, relationship to privilege, relationships to power. Um, or if you take, say, another, just a cishet Black guy, um, he also will have certain injustices that may not be the same across the line and may even be things you're not aware of. And so keeping in mind that race is this very particular set of issues that can layer on top of other identities, but also just like can be in and of itself an oppressive experience that, not to say is equal, because like that's not really the great terminology for that, um, but can be very different from your experiences of it. Uh, and that can be difficult for intersectionality of like being able to um, figure out like how you do this. So the thing I brought up was working with the most oppressed forward and upwards of like, if say I was supported as the Black LGBT member, the likelihood that the white LGBT member would also be supported is quite likely. Um, there is some overlap where that might not be true, but then you can work on that too. And the last quick thing is, you may be ashamed of other white people. Don't come to us. Go to other white people who know. I'm tired. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm tired.
Yes.
And then I think Ivy was going to talk a little bit about labels.
Yes. So that the idea of labels stems quite well from the last couple of things that Gray just said about being a singular minority and where we fall on that spectrum of privilege and disadvantage. And it seems to me like the dance communities that are largely white but consider themselves diverse are very focused on labels and boxes and checking off as many as they can. But that's not always our goal. And when we are always labeled Black first, it prioritizes something that may not be our number one descriptor in our lives. And it leads to tokenizing and pitying and reinforcing stereotypes. And it's not that we don't want you to be proud of who you are and what labels you wear, but that might be your thing and your cultural experience without it necessarily being ours. And I would like I would like for more care to be taken in simply putting us in one box and running with it. Even if that is your way of going through life and your preferred method. Also, these labels raise an issue because once Black people stop wearing their Blackness, then we start getting these questions about where we fit. And if we're, or say, if we stop being primarily counterculture or something to that effect, then people don't know how to handle us, because then our Blackness rises to the front and we just become this insurmountable other. And these labels actually serve to hurt us more rather than to diversify and elevate all of these voices and honor who everyone is. So I'd like you to reconsider whether that really is the best way to go through this space. No, you can't simply let all the defaults and the systemic barriers rise to the front and let the chips fall where they may, but your approach to labeling may not be the best approach for actually moving this scene forward. Okay, I think I covered all the label things. Gray, did you have anything that you wanted to?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of like I can feel the people in the chat like, oh.
So I guess the next thing we'll start with the plan going forward. Lucky you all, we planned the hell out of this. So yeah, Gray,
yeah.
let's do this.
Going forward, we kind of split it in a couple little sections. The first section is kind of just general stuff. We need you to do something useful about racism in your communities, racism you see, racism you enact. We need you to give up something. And there's a whole upcoming post about this, about like doing symbolic gestures isn't enough. And if an action you are taking doesn't have some type of risk involved, not necessarily for your like safety, but say you have to risk having a slightly more awkward family dinner to stand up for your friend, that is a risk. That is different than wearing a safety pin and being like, I'm here. It's great. Now do the risky thing. Like, do the action that may be you giving up some of the power that you were unjustly given, to kind of reframe that thought, and versus thinking about it always as us having injustices and us not having enough, that you have too much and you may need to give it up. And by giving it up, it's going to bring up feelings of shame and other people that, well, why are you doing that? Should I be doing that? The answer is yes. But then they have to address why they're not doing that. And you don't get to be angrier than us. This is the thing I see a lot. Modulate your anger. You don't like, it is great that you're angry. If you need to express the intensity of your anger at the injustices of the world, highly suggest you do so with loving white friends who will pat your back and tell you it's okay and that you're a good person, because the fact that you're angry says that you are at least down that path. But when you are angrier than us, a lot of mistakes happen. A lot of speaking for us happens. A lot of nuance gets lost. And there becomes a lot of issues in and of itself with that like, what to you seems outrageous is to me an everyday issue, whereas I might have a bigger issue that you might not even be aware of yet. And then, Ivy, do you want to do the excuses bit? Because it's
yes.
a long one.
So we'd also like you to recognize your excuses. When you say that you're worried about speaking over us as an excuse to not say anything, recognize that it is an excuse. You could ask us. When you say you're worried that you'll do the wrong thing, recognize that it's an excuse to not do anything. Not making a choice is a choice. The decision architecture that is set up in this world supports systemic injustice. So when you do nothing, you support that. So think about that next time. And remember that the longer you wait to try to do the right thing, the more on point it's going to have to be. So hurry up and get started instead of waiting for exactly the right thing. While you wait, you are hurting the people around you while you make a big show of finding the right thing. So let's not do that. Recognize that it's an excuse. Finally, When you say that you don't want to act because you're worried that you might offend somebody, that is an excuse that privileges the oppressor and it protects the feelings of the wrongdoer. It creates a space that values a peace that is not really a peace, it's just a silencing of others rather than progress and moving forward. So set aside that excuse. Let's not have it anymore. All right. Now, Gray, let's talk about what you would like to see going forward.
Great. So we're gonna have to go kind of fast through these because we technically are overtime, but like are but aren't we scheduled these things. As I mentioned earlier, making policies for the least privileged, when you are considering what is the best way to support people of diverse populations, and then specifically Black people, because, we fall into those diverse populations also. Uh, by using us as a potential example of would this be beneficial for um, your Black LGBT disabled members of the community, can be at least if nothing else, a great exercise to highlight uh, things you might miss if you only look at it through the white lens of things that are very specific towards the Black disabled LGBT community experience. And so if you're trying to be supportive, that can be a way to make sure you include them, is by highlighting them. Uh, Minority leadership and teachers, there are a lot of structural reasons why we don't have as many minority uh, teachers in leadership. And those things need to be addressed. And it might be a thing where, you need money to be able to do these things in some ways, because it's inaccessible for you to live on the money that is created through many of our scenes. Um, and that means that is a very clear and open way that makes it inaccessible for a lot of minority folks. If you're not educated or if you have other debts, you can't do this. If you aren't we said healthy, but I would even challenge that slightly of if you're not able-bodied, you can't or cannot easily do this work. If you have family obligations, that is definitely a complicated layer. And so people don't really consider that. Some other notes are like, not all the community is as poor as we present it to be. Um, and that is something that we should be looking at and thinking about. Not all Black people are poor. There could be other reasons, other limiting things, whether that just be the space or some of these other things that we mentioned that may be stopping people. Um, and we should consider, like, to be able to pay people and therefore be able to have more Black people in leadership, raise the prices. And I know that there have been some things of scholarships, but considering and looking at different frameworks to be able to actually support that kind of growth and change could be important to look at. Um, and then less gatekeeping and competitions, the culture of the event and the values that you put into your comps are going to shape uh, who wins and what wins. So, for instance, expecting vintage clothing, if it only favors extraordinarily thin white people, um, makes it kind of hard. And if that's a value that you have, or your value is for speed over innovation or creativity, that's going to kind of filter out some Black bodies.
Okay. So thank you for making sure I get time on that. I appreciate it. So for me going forward, I would like to see my personal agency honored. And I know that this is not enough for a lot of people, but for me, it's incredibly important and it should be an easy yes. When I say I want my personal agency honored, I want to be able to turn down dances with racists. If they've been spouting off for the last year about all sorts of racist things, and then I show up at the dance and they expect to use me as a dance dummy, I should be able to say no and specify that I'm saying no because they're racist. And it's gonna ruffle some feathers. So I do need support to say no. And I need to be able to specifically say why. Because if I don't say why, then their narrative will be the dominating one. And their narrative is usually, oh, such and such is an elitist. They won't dance with me. It's cliquey. No, we don't want to dance with you because you're racist. And that's different. I also think it's important to specify that so that it doesn't become a watered down, oh, just don't dance with whoever you don't want to dance with. Because I am very aware that when you set that as the rule, the people who lose out are already the marginalized people who are usually sitting on the sidelines. So I think it's really important to recognize what specifically you are trying to do by honoring this agency and who you are trying to protect. So one of the benefits for an organizer is that it honors the person, it recognizes what's happening, but it doesn't require you to ban anybody. It doesn't require you to kick anybody out. It's a really low lift and a great way to get started. And if you can't do that, then I'm pretty sure you're not somebody I want to be around. The other side of this whole rejecting racists is that I need other people to feel empowered to stand up with me. Because if you see this only as a Black issue or a whomever issue, then there will never be enough of us to make any sort of change. They will hear the no from us and they'll just move on to the next person and dance with them. They won't feel any sort of consequences. All they will remember is that Ivy was an elitist or some other junk. So if you want to actually change things, then we need you to stand with us in solidarity and make those same choices. Eventually, that will change the culture of what is acceptable. And we do need a culture where it is more uncomfortable to be racist than it's uncomfortable to be Black. So those are the things that I'd really like to see. Fen, you can take it over if you'd like.
I'm just sitting here with that statement of like, more uncomfortable to be racist than it is uncomfortable to be Black. What a world. That would be a world.
Yeah.
I sure would love that. Okay. I don't know where we go from here. I only planned the earlier part.
I think we move to letting folks back in. So folks who are muted and uncameraed, you are now welcome to turn your cameras back on. The way I run the question, great, you trying to say something? No, you're waving at friends. Great, wave at friends. What I would like to do is don't do anything yet because there's a lot of you. I am going to have people put their names in the chat if they want to ask a question, but I am going to give first dibs to the Black people in the audience. So I will do a round for the Black people in the audience where you can stick your names in the chat if you want to ask questions. And then once we get through those, I will open it up to everyone else. So video settings, I'm bringing everybody back. There we go. Okay. State your name in the chat if you are a Black person in the audience who would like to ask something or say something to Ivy and Gray.
I was curious if that would happen because I'm like, anytime these types of events happen and I'm Black and I'm like, this ain't for me. So most of the time I'm not here at this kind of stuff. So it's just like, I would, I know that every once in a while I'll pop in and be like, what they talking about? but I anticipate that that might not be the case.
I usually just roll my eyes because it's somebody protecting their status that requires the status quo to remain in place. And I'm just like, ugh. So, yeah,
I recognize some of these names. That's exciting.
cool.
Yeah.
I am
I
not
think
seeing names in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I may do another round. If we get I'll do a round of open questions and then I might do a pause in the middle and see if other folks want to add back in. So everybody, if you have questions, stick your name in the chat and I'm going to invite Sarah to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I have two, so I think I might save a second for the next round if there's time. The one that first came to mind is sustainability for Black dancers and other dancers of color when there is so much pain, often weekly, or just constantly in our interactions with community. I know I feel that personally, and I know that's the case for a lot of my friends in the scene. I'm in the Bay Area fusion scene in particular. And I was wondering how you both cope with that, like just chronic microaggressions, chronic marginalization. How do you maintain the desire to stay in the scene and to grow when you are so often met with disrespect and not even like conscious disrespect, but just an environment of inherent racial hostility?
Gray, do you want to go?
I will go and give you a sec. I mean, personally, that's always been my life. I'm from small town Ohio, and I mean small town. For the most part, there's not much that the dance community has thrown at me that is any abnormal than like an average middle school day in small town Ohio. Um, so mostly I'm used to it. For me specifically, it's when it compounds with other areas of intersectionality that it gets to me. And those are the nights that I will leave and go home and cry. They're very rare, but they do happen. So, like, that's why I've been advocating so strongly for considering that, you know, when you think LGBT, do you think of Black people too? Because we exist. And honestly, there's a lot of crossover in the scene in particular in our population. We just talk about it and exist differently in some ways. But also, the other reason I've definitely gone home and cried was because of seeing how much, even though things can be a Black dance, Blackness isn't intertwined into the scene. Like the music is all white, or all the competitions are all white people, or are upholding all white values. And, you know, going through that night and you're like, I enjoyed the music. Okay, I still have friends. And then if you're at a wrong venue and people won't dance with you, like, okay, well, I can still compete. And then you compete and you get almost into the competition. And then you see the white lineup. And then you see the values on display. And you're just like, they don't want me here. And you just leave. But generally, like, I would just say that I am more used to it. And I would actually, instead of wondering how I cope, I would challenge white community members to consider that we have to cope, and what you could consider doing about the fact that I regularly leave dances crying as your community member and potentially friend. What are we doing about that? And I'm curious to Ivy, what your thoughts are.
Well, it should be unsurprising that my coping mechanism was just to be absolutely necessary as an organizer and the lawyer and the policy drafter and the DJ and the person who could do everything. I threw myself into work and was 100 times better than every other organizer. And that was the only way that I was ever okay. And I was still just used. People looked to me as the elder statesman who keeps a clean house and lives like a responsible adult. And so I'm the person that they want to host their pros and pick them up from the airport and do all of those things. And now I say no. And now I don't have a place that I belong. Once I stopped giving and stopped working, I lost my place. Before I started organizing, I was in Lindy Hop for 10 years and I danced 5 times a night. And I thought that was good. I was just too dumb to know. And my 5 times was more than the 4 times that the other darker skinned Black girl danced. And I thought that was good enough. And I just don't have any good answers because that approach is not a good one.
Yeah, that is, for those who don't know, I'm trans. That is the thing I've experienced in the past. And it can be hard to go into a new community or even your community and watch yourself be not acknowledged as a human in the space who is desirable, even if it's just for dance. And to go a whole night, which I have, and not dance. And not from lack of asking, because that's the other thing I get a lot is people kind of are like, oh, well, is it still a you problem? Because they're thinking about it from their own experiences. And it's like, no, I get a lot of no's. And today that's even more complicated because I'm a trans male follow. And the scene, as progressive as we are in some aspects for LGBT and for transgender stuff, is not as good about other stuff. And particularly not as good for intersectional minority statuses. So I still leave crying sometimes, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I have, I guess, 2 more things to say on that one. I'm a successful West Coast swing competitor. I got from first event to advanced in a year and still regularly make finals. Yet when I'm called to dance with somebody, every single time that it's somebody who doesn't already actively prefer me, I get this. Where they don't want to take my hand. It was like I asked them to dance with a bucket of vomit. And I clearly am not that bad. But they treat me like I am. The other thing is that I will just never forget how bad I felt on the closing night of the Fusion Exchange that I had planned meticulously. And everybody told me how much they loved it. And it was just this big love fest about how great and life-changing the Fusion Exchange was. And then I couldn't get a dance at my own event. I asked so many people and they all turned me down. So I went in the hallway and I cried at my own event. And that should be unacceptable.
Yeah, this reminds me of a game I play. I like to travel, and I like to travel in before, because there's no other questions, so we're going to keep jamming on this topic.
I was going to say, folks, I know we're all sitting and listening to this. If you put your name in the chat, I will make space for your question, or we can sit and listen to Gray and Ivy some more.
I have a follow-up to this thread of conversation.
Yeah.
Makes sense to share at some point soon.
Would you like to go?
I'd like to hear what you have to say first.
Okay. I like to travel into places early. This is particularly before the blue mohawk phase, where now it stands out a bit more. But we're so unused to seeing Black people in our communities that people often don't pay attention to me. And this is partly, me as a person, and I do this on purpose. But I'd like to go and see what the community is like. Outside of the dance video, rather outside of the weekend, because I want to see what the local community is like. And I'll often go and I'll just be rather quiet because I'm genuinely there just to participate as a dancer. I'm not running around being like, I'm teaching this weekend. I'm the person who helped run your event. That's not, and I'll kind of note how long it takes for people to say hi. or people to ask me to dance, or people to check in, how they interact with me, if I get that face that Ivy is talking about, because I get that face on a regular basis, particularly Friday night of events. I will get that face, different versions of it. It's usually softer than that one, but it's the, I guess. And then whoever it is touches my hand, and then they realize, oh, you can dance, and oh, you're actually a good follow. That suddenly people are like, wow, it's so good to talk and see you, and wow. I'm like, yes.
And
like,
then the test drive. Ooh,
Uh,
but can you do this? Ooh, but can you do this? Ooh, but I'm going to trip you up somewhere. There's clearly somewhere that you haven't trained and don't know.
and my favorite is the end of that dance, when they're like, wow, you're really great. Are you in town for the event? And I usually will go, oh yeah, I'm teaching classes tomorrow. Will I see you in class? And then I was like, it's my favorite. I get a dark pleasure out of this. But when I go to small events, local stuff beforehand, I will see how long that takes, and then that process usually happens. And then suddenly people are more interested in me once they realize I can dance. Not just being a new face is not enough. I have to be a new face and able to dance and be these things before someone who's usually like the guy who like takes the newbies around will come by and be like, hi, how are you? Do you know how to dance? And I'm like, yeah, I dance. Would you like to dance? I'd love to dance. And then we start off with some of this. And it's a fun time. It's a fun time. So I know that Sarah had a follow-up question, and I know that we also had.
We've got a. I see Ivy. We're going to go to Ivy first.
Oh, I missed that.
And then we've got a Christy J. Wells, and then we've got a Christina Tannett, and then we'll go to Sarah's follow-up. We have questions.
Fancy, because I'm like, oh, I see they're sending them to you in private, so that's cool. Ivy.
So one of the things about not getting asked to dance and sitting on the sidelines, a lot of that comes from the presumption that we're not actually dancers and we're not there to dance. It's like we're treated like we're some person who wandered in off the street and couldn't possibly know, because the presumption is that this isn't our space. We don't belong here. We're an aberration. We're an exception. And so you need to see if we're really one of you, rather than presuming that we're there because we want to dance and can dance. And somehow we're supposed to pop out fully formed, but never have anybody to train with us. And I don't really know how people expect that to happen. If I hadn't been dumb enough to invest years and years and years in another dance scene and then pop out fully formed into West Coast Swing, I don't know that I would ever have gotten a dance. So, okay, I swear I'm going to stop jamming on that. Then.
Christy J. Wells?
Hi. Can y'all hear me okay? Sometimes my mic gets weird. Okay, great. So I wanted to ask a follow-up or a question specifically about this issue of Black people not being asked to dance, or white people at dances just not dancing with Black people for all of the reasons you were talking about. And my question is about, aside from just the obvious, personal intervention of like dance with everyone in the venue, certainly including Black people who are there. What sorts of things do you think white dancers can and should, or non-Black dancers can and should be doing to help interrupt and foster, to help foster a culture that more broadly interrupts that dynamic, without embarrassing or making specific Black dancers in the space hypervisible or uncomfortable?
What I do is, I do this with my older friends who also don't get asked to dance. So I will dance with somebody and they're good. And then I will bring them over to my older friend and say, hey, you should meet such and such. And I just walked them right over to somebody else who wouldn't get a dance. And it's kind of hard to say no. You certainly look like the jerk if you look them up and down and say no to that. So it's a good way to use your power and also just the momentum of the situation.
I also think like that can be very person dependent. Like, don't do that to me. I would not be very happy. Um, not because I'm not interested in a dance, just because that is a definite trigger. Like even you just saying it for anxiety, I was just like, ugh. Because then, you know, there's some weird expectation. And I think it has to do with like how well known you are in your venue and blah, blah, blah. Of like, that might be a weird expectations for me as a figure of leadership, I suppose. That also the fact that they don't know me, and then because they might, but then also the like, oh, I'm dancing with the instructor now, so like they play the like instructor game, and I don't want to. I don't want it. Um, but the thought that came to mind for me was, yes, this can be an individual thing, and I think doing this in terms of like, I think organizationally, if you have a group of people that goes out and dances with the Black people, it's going to be weird. But I think that's very different than having a group of your friends that the intention is to, uh, when you see the new Black person that comes in the room, be welcoming and not weird about it. Please don't be weird about it. Um, to have your group of friends be like, yeah, we're going to include this person in our dinner plans. We're going to include them into uh, our jams and our hangouts and our whatever, um, can be a big difference because it's an in-group versus out-group thing. So sometimes for you or people who aren't actively trying to do this thing, giving them the reminder that this is a person in your in-group, this is a person I like and care about and want around, and you need to do that too, can be a like more group community wide effort that you can kind of shift the community towards that, with your and your group of friends' actions.
I'm going to pause because I want to be transparent about a couple of things. We are at time and there are more questions. But the first thing I want to do is thank Ivy and Gray, who have just given us so much of themselves this evening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for speaking and giving us your generosity and your honesty. The second thing I want to do is to tell people that next week we have Voice Porter and Ann Tronson. They are amazing Birmingham, Alabama based artists. They have done a huge amount working to get people access to arts, access to funding, access to community growth. They are incredible organizers. They do amazing grassroots work. I would love if folks would come back, even if you don't know who they are, come back and hear them like speak and do their thing. I don't believe they're in the audience tonight. We also have another month of these Tuesday night talks. The flyer for what those talks are and their topics is going up in the Facebook group. Once we finish here, so I am posting the link to the Facebook group in the chat. There it is. If you want to get on top of more of these Tuesday night talks, this is where you go and find out about it. That's an alarm going off to feed the cats. Don't worry, that has nothing to do with us. It's taken care of. So what I'm going to say is I have documented the questions that are in the chat. I will put those in the Facebook group. I am not going to require Ivy and Gray to stay overtime. What I am going to do is what we usually do, which is I'm going to put everybody off the clock. I'm going to turn off the camera, and folks who want to stay and hang out, not as like guest speakers and people, but just as people, are welcome to stay and hang out. Basically until I run out of energy, which won't be that much longer. But again, one more giant thank you to Ivy and Gray for being here and for giving us that time.
And thank you, Fen, for hosting us. It's been a pleasure. and I got to meet Ivy, and that was also a pleasure. She amazing. It's such a good fun to talk to, and it was just
Getting to know Gray was like the best part of this.